Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Planting the Seeds of Leadership, Growing Your Skills at Any Level webinar with Jenny Burke, Science Librarian at Butler University. My name is George Bergstrom, and I am the Southwest Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the question moderator for today. We're also happy to announce that if you want to visit the Indiana State Library's website, we should have a whole bunch of webinars on the archive page that you can take advantage of. Also, for announcements, if you visit us, www.in.gov/library. Today's session is 1 hour, so you will get 1 LEU. If you are watching the archived recording of this webinar, the instructions on how to obtain your LEU are available in the video's description on YouTube. Or you can also find the instructions on the Indiana State Library's continuing education site under the LEU policies. I'll now turn the presentation over to Jenny.
Hello, good morning. Just a few things. So yes, I am Jenny Burke. I am the science librarian at Butler University. As previously mentioned, I've kind of been all over the place. I just started at Butler this past year, so July 1st of 2022. This is my second year as an academic librarian altogether. I've mostly been a public librarian through my career, but I've also been a school librarian and a special librarian. So I've been in records rooms. So I've kind of bounced within the types of library, which apparently is not very common. But I just want to let you know, I will have the slides available. And I fidget and move a lot when I talk, so I'm actually going to turn my camera off while I present because I don't want to distract anybody. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. There we go. Okay, so today's presentation is in essence going to be a bit of a lit review almost. I mean, this is a topic I'm really interested in. I was very excited about this. I don't often get to just sit here and talk for an hour about things that I'm excited about. But this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. Before I get started, I want to shout out to Miranda. She is a Butler Library student staffer who I was having a bit of a mental block in the beginning of this, getting this set up, and I just happened to mention it to her. And she had a couple really awesome suggestions for me. And just in the spirit of this entire presentation about that whole leadership at every level, she gave me some advice and I followed it, and it was wonderful. It really kind of lifted that mental block for me. And so thank you, Miranda, for that. So leadership training, this is kind of something that's typically reserved for people in management positions. This is not a new topic by any stretch, but I think it's one worth exploring in our industry, especially right now with everything that is impacting us and going on in our industry, both in Indiana and nationwide. So again, a bit of a lit review, but the main key takeaways is that there's a net benefit to everyone in all areas of organizations when organizations provide training and openly advocate for leadership training at every level of staff. Personally, I am all for leadership training all the way from page to director. So that's kind of the whole point of this. So what piqued my interest in this is a little bit of my patterns in my career. When I was a public librarian, I've been a librarian for about 10 years. This is actually a third career for me. I was a classroom teacher prior to this, as well as a corporate and nonprofit administrator. But when I was in public library, the last public library that I worked in, which was Louisville Public Library in Louisville, Colorado, I had joined CAL, the Colorado Association of Libraries, and I had worked on the CalCon, so our state conference committee, for a number of years. And somebody approached me and said, why don't you run for the board of directors? And of course, I'm a librarian. So of course, and Cal board for the most part is made up of supervisors. And so I'm like, but I'm a librarian. This doesn't, can I even do this? But my management, my direct supervisor, her name is Becky. And then Sharon, our director, was like, no, this is a really good thing. So I ran for the board, and come to find, and I actually ran against a supervisor and was really shocked when I won the seat. And so kind of looking back at that, I realized that I was one of the only library staffers versus management on the board of directors. And I was getting a lot of feedback that having that representation was really important. And so that light bulb went off a little bit. But I was lined up to go to the Cal Library Leadership Institute this last fall, actually, but then I got this job and moved here. And so just, I kind of wanted to follow that out and requested to go to the Leadership Institute that's offered through the Indiana State Library. And my dean here was like, well, okay. He's like, sure, why not? And then but in thinking about that why as a librarian, I should go through this is where the split review happened. So this is kind of where that came through. And I started looking back at my career and realized that leadership and leadership training was the single commonality in all of my positions. While I've never been a supervisor, I've always had a tendency to take on leadership roles in different aspects. And I've had some aspect of leadership training since I was a child, because I grew up in scouting and I was also really involved in music and things like that. But the fact is I'm not special. I'm not unique. I've got a lot of curiosity, as most librarians do and library staff does. I tend to tackle a lot, but having these types of trainings baked into band leadership, honor society, things like that has really helped me along the way. So one thing I want to emphasize before we really jump in is that this is not a magic fix, but this is proven to help. So we'll start with that. So what are we talking about really? When we think about leadership, we think about like direct management training. And there's a lot that kind of goes into this, a lot that kind of counts as leadership training. So these are the types of things that I'm talking about. I kind of tried to define hard skill and soft skill. There is some crossover here. Hard skills are specific abilities, capabilities, or skill sets that an individual can possess and demonstrate in a measurable way. Could also be defined as a technical skill. Soft skills definitely more are things that are harder to measure. Sometimes people will call them character traits, but they really kind of center in on interpersonal skills and kind of more that relationship aspect. So like your hard skills could be like conflict resolution, project management. This is a big one, both small and large. Change management. So that's that whole process of leading people through changes, which we have to do a lot from top to bottom in libraries, especially now. Time and energy management, coaching and mentor, that I feel like can kind of go on both ends. That can go in soft skills or hard skills, but there is a pattern to it. Leading innovation, there's patterns to that. Strategic planning, emergency preparedness, and negotiation. So these are just examples of hard skills. Soft skills, assertiveness training, which is, by the way, I've been through and very, very beneficial. Communication, building trust and respect, team building. Delegation is, again, one of those where I feel like it kind of lands on both sides of hard skills and soft skills. Motivating colleagues, managing meetings, which again falls on both sides, advocacy, group dynamics, and critical thinking. So these are just a very short list of these types of trainings that to me all are encompassed in leadership training. So I wasn't just looking at specifically those management pieces, but when you look at these types of skills, these are things that are, again, you would, at least on the surface, seem beneficial to everyone, not just those who are in formal management positions. So I decided we'll cover the bad news first, and then we'll jump into the good news. So this is kind of the current picture. This is overall United States employment statistics. This is not specifically libraries. So as of these are mostly from Pew Research, Gallup polls, a couple other things. These are pretty recent. These are 2022 numbers, I believe. 83% of organizations believe it's important to develop leaders at every level, but only 5% have actually implemented programs. And that's a huge number difference. 69% of employees born between 1980 and 2000 feel a lack of leadership development. I looked a little bit into this number. It's both sides. It's a lack of their own supervisors and it's a lack of their own development, not just how they feel about their supervisors. This heavily has to do with how they feel, whether or not they feel ready to take this on. People who are born in this range, this is the millennial age group, which is I fall into. I mean, we're kind of at that point. We are in mid-career for the most part. And traditionally, this is around the time you start, training people for that next generation of leadership. Increased in, so there's been a large increase in retirement since 2019 per Pew Research. This has a lot to do with COVID. COVID numbers have only increased this. We've seen a significant increase in that early retirement since then. And so we're kind of in this crux. What do we do if we're only reserving leadership training for those already in management? How do we deal with this issue where we have mid-career who's ready to move up and you have a lot of people retiring early? We're hitting a bit of a gap that we didn't before. Used to be a bit more of a natural bridge, but our modern world is not looking that way. And then of course, these are tough numbers. These were tough numbers even for me to look at just as a staff member. Disengaged employees, 37%, 37% higher absenteeism, 49% more accidents, and 60% more errors for people who are not engaged at work. So if you're not mentally plugged into what you're doing, and you don't feel that buy-in at work, this is what happens. 35% of American workers prioritize company culture in job searches. The reason I bring that up is leadership training and this supportive leadership training, as we'll see in a few slides, actually plays heavily into how people feel about their company culture. So this is library specific. We're at a bit of a tipping point right now. Again, so this ACRL study is from 2019. So this is about 5 years old. I don't know how much these numbers have changed since then, but we'll see. So we're at a record high for public library collection sizes. Now the caveat to that is almost 55% is now digital. This was in 2019. And again, this was prior to COVID. So this has probably grown since then. We're at a record high for collection use, and we're at a record high for card holders. 2019, we saw almost 175 million people, but nationwide and government-wide, we're operating at a deficit since 1992, and we're on a 10-year decline in physical circulation and foot traffic, which again, I feel like anyone working in a library building has seen this. I think we have all felt this. Now, not always in the children's section, I will say that. And sometimes we were absolutely slammed, especially in public library. It's been absolutely wild in certain areas, but this is a nationwide average. So kind of some of the issue with why are we losing people? And this again was in 2019. So ACRL did a survey, a study of librarians. This was specifically academic librarians who had left their jobs in the past 5 years. So 79% identified workplace morale as a most significant reason. 72% were dissatisfied with library administration. Again, I don't know what goes into that. And again, this is nestled within academic libraries. So there's a lot of different layers there. And of course, public library, school library, all of us deal with different types of administration layer to this. And just interesting challenges. 70% identified the culture of the library. 64% identified their immediate supervisor. There's some other stats that I gathered here. 50% of US workers have left a job due to bad management. I am personally among that number. Not at Louisville. So if any of you are watching out there, I did not leave Louisville because of that. So it's kind of this process of, well, what do we do? We're at this crisis point. We're at this tipping point. We also then have dealt with COVID. We've dealt with reorganization problems due to limited funding, and then also a lot of structure changes when retirees have not been replaced. And of course, the political environment. Any of us in Indiana are feeling that pretty hard right now. I know I am. I actually live in Hamilton County, if anyone is aware of what's going on there. And then just, of course, with the laws being passed, this has been a very nerve-wracking time for us, big time. And I don't know what that's going to look like, moving forward. But this is where we kind of turn to, okay, what can we do? What can we actually, actionably do to help our people through this? And I'm speaking as somebody who doesn't even manage people. It's like, what can I do too? We all want to know. So supporting each other and our people through changes is a big piece of this. There's whole studies on change management. So I actually have I think there's a reference that all has to do with change management in here, but just that whole process of promoting empathy, self-awareness, commitment, communication, etc. This is really going to be key, I think, now and moving forward. And this is a big caveat here. I have this marked in the references as well. There was a whole study done by Harvard Business Review about how individual leadership training only goes so far. Our system has to be set up to support it. The environment of the library itself or organization has to be structured in a way that promotes professional development for these things to really take hold and be beneficial. But in the case where we are being very directly supported, this is the good news. So this is kind of where the lit review comes into play, and the heaviness can kind of go away here. So employees, as we know, our staff a library without library staff is a room full of books. And in some cases, not full of books, but library staff is our lifeblood. It's what makes a library in my view. So the good news from all the research is that promoting leadership training and professional development at every level, from top to bottom, increases employee commitment and inspires your best to stay, which is a big thing. We're seeing really high turnover for a lot of different things that may or may not be in our control, but these pieces are. So it improves that organization culture, which, as we've seen, has been a really big sticking point for a lot of people. Kind of shares the load in hiring and training. I can personally attest to, I've been on many hiring committees. I am actually trained here at Butler to be an inclusion advocate. Every one of Butler's hiring panels has an inclusion advocate to make sure that we're following hiring best practices. I will say there's a few that we're slipping on, but that is actually a little bit more controlled by the university versus the library. But there was a situation at Louisville, and this was pretty cool. It was a rough situation, but it was neat. And this is where my own leadership training really became beneficial to me as a library staff member. Right before COVID hit, we had 2 retirements announced. One was my direct supervisor, who had been at that library for many years. And then one of our librarians who had just turned 80. And she was an absolutely lovely woman. And I was so excited because last time I talked to one of my colleagues from Louisville. I left Louisville 3 years ago, so this has been a while, and this was before COVID. So, but she retired, and then our supervisor retired, and then one of our librarians got a different job and left for a government library, and then our library associate got moved in a reorganization to children's. And then our other library associate got moved into administration. So she was the admin for the director. So that left me. So the adult department became a power of one. So it was just me. And so when we did go to hire the new adult and collection supervisor, all the training landed on me. So I was, in essence, training and evaluating my own supervisor for almost a month. And I have to admit that because of the training that I have received in the past, this was not as big of a hurdle as I felt like it was going to be. We did have some training documents that, I mean, on quite a few I had helped writing, in writing, because that's just something I do. Every time I start a job, I create a manual for myself if there's not already one. Because I have ADHD and I tend to forget a lot of things. If it's not written down, it's going to go out my brain. So I went through the training manual with her. I sat through, during her reference shifts and things like that. She hadn't done reference in a while. She had been managing technical services for quite some time. So I was literally in essence, stepping into the role of her supervisor for a while. And because I had had a lot of this conflict management and critical conversation training and all these different things, when the time came for us to, in essence, flip roles, which was an interesting and delicate process, it was done in a very smooth manner. Because when you're basically the person training and supervising your supervisor, that flip does have to happen. And depending on how comfortable somebody is kind of taking on the roles that they were just trained on, because we all know when we start a new job, it's rough. And whether you feel like you know what you're doing or not, that those first couple times when you're out there by yourself can be a little bit nerve-wracking. So, but knowing when that time came and how to flip those roles was really interesting. And so, but because I felt very comfortable doing that, and she felt comfortable doing that, and I feel like I can attribute a lot of that leadership training to that smooth process, even though a lot of that training started even when I was young. So back to our points, encouraging self-leading in projects. This is a big deal. This takes a lot of load off of administration, really. Especially when we're dealing with a lot of political issues right now. Our concentration is not necessarily on these smaller projects, but being able to have our staff take on those projects instead of our administration is really helpful. And I think that ties into the increasing productivity, efficiency, overall agility, things like that. The whole draws and retains talent. When you're a library that really promotes that professional development, we all know that we want to work in a place that supports that. So this was a very interesting statistic. In for-profit companies, profits increased every time, which was really, really fascinating. I saw a statistic that said that for every year an organization put off leadership development, even in lower levels, it cost them 7% of their total annual sales, which that is obviously, as libraries, we don't see, we're not for profit, but just the fact that for-profit companies are seeing this type of increase in efficiency and sales, it's got to mean something. Also creates a strong internal talent pool, which does reduce hiring and training costs, increases strategic thinking, which is a big thing for us, especially because as we go through these changes that we're seeing, we're going to need to be able to have everyone pivot when necessary. And then, of course, that eases that tension in communication. It kind of provides a bit of commonality in vocabulary and language for staff members to really communicate in ways that, I mean, as administration, I feel like you all live in a very heavy admin and political world most of the time. The staff members don't. And so creating a bit of that common community, that common vocabulary, I feel like can be very helpful. To kind of break that, that code switching really is kind of what that I feel like that helps with. Professional development lands on a number of lists in ways to, again, draw talent, retain talent, along with other things like meaningful work and ensuring that managers have high emotional intelligence. So that those came from a number of Forbes lists. And then another piece of this that I kind of wanted to throw out is just personal and organizational legacy. This is a complete and total aside from the actual statistics. I can personally attest to the managers who I look back in my career and think of with a lot of fondness are the people who really supported me getting development, really supporting my training and supporting me in pursuing the things that I wanted to pursue. And those who really kind of supported this type of training, because again, this is something you think of as managers getting as opposed to staff members. So this is kind of library specific benefits. This would lead to better relationship building with vendors. As a librarian, I was responsible with dealing with vendors in a number of city libraries so far. All that efficiency and things like that, increased communication, increases our patron service. The policies and procedures and more agility in strategic planning is a really helpful thing. It's a very hard thing to communicate sometimes when, as an administrator, you know where your strategic planning needs to go, but sometimes it's hard to communicate that to somebody who maybe is just mostly working at a reference desk or mostly working at a circulation desk. So being able to have your staff members have a better understanding of just the political and corporate environment that we have to deal with, it kind of, again, creates some commonality in understanding and increases the visibility of the library itself. So the fact that I'm giving this webinar, Butler's name is on this, et cetera. It was also one of the reasons why my director was very supportive of me being a part of CAL is, again, your library's name is on that as well. So, and of course, this does help the gender gap, which we know still exists within libraries. So in 2022, 82.2% of librarians were female, but only and 78.5% of library assistants were female, but only 61.9% were managers. So we're still seeing a gap in those percentages. And of course, the salary gap still exists. And then with salaries, female librarians are seeing an 88% of the salary that men are, and in management, 93% salary. So we're still seeing this gap, but a lot of this research is showing that the more and more women are supported through leadership training, those gaps are closing. It increases resourcefulness, quick thinking, problem solving, things that, and kind of that risk taking. So there's a lot, some of that research is showing that female specific leadership training is leading to a lot of gap closure in organizations that dedicate time to that. Another key method to that, as an aside, was mentoring, which I know that libraries like to do a lot. It's a very, very positive thing. Mentorship is awesome. I have been part of a mentorship program for a very long time, and I'm a huge advocate of mentors having mentors. So I will, no matter how many people I have mentored through this process, I will always be I don't have a mentor right now, so if you know of anybody, I'm open. So direct benefit to staff. So this is to the library staff. This is the benefit to you all. Again, provides that vocabulary that clearly communicates what you need. So you can better advocate for yourself. You can translate your skill set, and you can pitch your ideas. So one thing that I found interesting through this process, as I was looking through the literature and the research with this, is that this consistent mentioning of vocabulary, common vocabulary, and being able to translate your skill set. So when I was in college, with my MLS, I went back after I had, I'd already been working a while when I went back for my master's. And just after going through the courses that talk about the different types of library, I kind of offhand mentioned, it would be really cool to work in all 4 different types of library. And I had a professor kind of shut that down a little. She's like, oh, that doesn't really happen. A lot of people work in maybe 2. But working in all 4 is in essence kind of said that's a bit of a pipe dream, because hopping from one area of the industry to the other is rarely done. It's really hard to do. And again, this might be the ADHD thing, I don't know, but I have a tendency to not consider obstacles as problems, just something to negotiate. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, we'll see. And so I just kind of tabled it in my mind. But moved into the professional world and started hearing this message more I was told early on that if I moved into public too quickly, then I would be pigeonholed, which I thought was silly because public library is hard. It is difficult, and it requires hard work and thinking on your feet, and I don't feel like public libraries get the respect they deserve sometimes in this industry because of how difficult it can be to do that job really well. And I have huge amounts of respect for public library, but I was told the same thing even with school library. I was hearing just this very common phrase of, oh, well, you're going to get pigeonholed. You're going to get pigeonholed. So I didn't think a whole lot about it because this wasn't it. I thought it would be a cool thing, but I didn't think about it being kind of an ultimate goal or anything. Well, looking back at it now, I have now worked in all 4 major types of library, and all ultimately that took was being able to translate my skill set and communicate it, which you have to be able to do. Even my first academic library job, I was actually hired primarily because of my teaching certification, as opposed to having they almost considered my public library to be almost a moot point, which not everyone, I will say that, not everyone on that hiring committee thought that way. But some people did. But I had a teaching certification, and academic librarians have to teach quite a bit. But I can tell you, it's not terribly different than just being in programming. But again, it's that translation, being able to articulate why our skill set is easily transferable from all 4 types of library. Again, team development benefits to the staff. You don't have to be the loudest voice on a team to be not only to lead, but to just be the person subtly running the meetings sometimes, because sometimes this can be a very challenging thing, as we all know. Navigating team meetings can be a very big challenge. It grows your confidence, grows your resourcefulness and your adaptability. There's a lot of studies that interviewed people after they received leadership training, especially in areas of time and energy management. A lot of very positive things have come out of that. Just in being able to balance that, work and life. Having good time and energy management means being able to hang that hat, at the end of the day and go home. Kind of bolsters your ability to move up or move out if necessary. Because that is a challenge. This is a constant balance for all of us. We are all employees, but we are all also people. We have responsibilities at home. We have responsibilities. So we have responsibilities to our work, but we also have responsibilities to ourselves and our family. And sometimes you do end up in a situation where it is not a good environment or everything else. So having some of that training is, and again, that ability to translate that skill set gives you an ability to get out of a negative situation. Also reduces anxiety around change. Which again, we know we're facing a lot of, because you better understand what you bring to the table, and you better understand your place within the organization itself. Having more understanding of strategy, having, those strategic policies, having better understanding of how the structure is created. This is not a popular idea. This is just something that I tend to view. And I've rubbed people the wrong way, so fair warning with this. I have a tendency to view libraries much the way I do corporations. While we are not for-profit organizations, definitely not what I'm saying. We are not as cutthroat as for-profit companies, but I see a lot of similarities in the structures. And when I have applied my knowledge of working in the corporate world to working in libraries, there's been benefits to that. Understanding that there are only certain things that I can change from my position, understanding that there are only certain things I can personally do, but then there are other things that I can get involved in and produce and inspire change and things like that. So it kind of, having that leadership training and understanding has given me a better understanding of where I fit into an organization. And it reduces, and for me, it even reduces anxiety, because I know that there are the things that I can't change, I'm able to let go of in a little bit easier manner than I've seen in the past. Another thing as a staff member is kind of this piece of demonstrating that initiative and asking for this, particularly when you're in an organization that doesn't necessarily have these policies in place. So that leads to the big question. Okay, if I'm in an organization, if I'm in a library that doesn't have much professional development budget, or I'm working with administration who doesn't necessarily support this type of thing, what can I do as an individual? So this is kind of my last little bit, and this is kind of my plug a little for the state library. So training for individuals, where do you get it? So state associations are a good place to look for this. Colorado versus Indiana, I've noticed a number of differences in the way the state association versus the state library runs. So in Colorado, the state association carries a lot of the professional development more so than the state library. The state library in Colorado does. They're heavy in negotiation, they're both involved in certain aspects of the legal aspects, the laws, the things like that. Cal does most of the advocacy. And then Indiana, I noticed the balance is just a little bit different. So ILF is a lot more heavy in the advocacy. The state library provides more of the professional development, but not to say they don't do both. But state to state, it's a little bit different. So depending on where you are, you may want to look into that. Library Juice Academy has been really good. Now, this does cost money. Each class I've seen is about $200 to $300. But they're kind of like miniature college classes. They're shorter term than college classes, but that has been a really cool place for me to find really good trainings. In-house and organizational trainings. I know in the public library that I have been in, we were part of a city system. And so at Louisville specifically, Louisville was part of the city system. And so they would periodically bring in different types of training. The big one that I really, really enjoyed was the assertiveness training. I actually think that was probably one of the most valuable trainings that I have ever been through. So I'm just going to plug that. Assertiveness training is really, really neat, because it's not about training people how to be a bully. It's about how to properly bring your needs to the table, how to properly negotiate that, how to speak up, how to have that confidence in what you need, things like that. So it was a very, very cool training. I've actually found LinkedIn Learning, which is a little bit of, many people have different feelings about LinkedIn Learning. I think it's okay. I have found some good things on it. I find Udemy to be a little bit better. Downside to Udemy, depending on your system, is you may have to pay for it, but some public libraries also give you Udemy logins. And then other types of online training. There's actually quite a bit of free online training. There's a lot of MOOCs out there, Mass Online something. I'm trying to remember what that stands for, but those are really great. They're usually put out by universities and colleges. And then that question of, if I don't have funding and if I'm interested in kind of gaining, this is a bigger question, especially if somebody is interested in eventually moving up into management. And of course, all of our job postings say required supervision, but we have never worked in a supervisory position. How do you get that? How do you get that experience and things like that? And this is where I've really found this is kind of that bread and butter. If you're a staff member, this is how you gain some of this, is committee work, either local, district, consortium, state. There's all kinds of opportunities to work on committees, especially through those state associations and other types of professional organizations. Programming itself actually takes a tremendous amount of project planning, especially if they're large programs, but even the small ones. So that alone can give you a lot of just that leadership and coordination experience. Volunteer coordination, most libraries have assigned this to somebody, but maybe they want to quit doing it, or even just volunteer coordination within your program. I was a technology librarian at Louisville. I ran the makerspace, and I was responsible for recruiting, training, and supervising makerspace makerspace volunteers. And often in my large STEM programs, I would have associates or techs come in and assist me with those, and just kind of training them, spot training on how to do those things. Projects, big or small. I've done very small things from, hey, we need a new 3D printer. So putting together a quick presentation that went to the Friends group, which we got the funding for, which was great. That was a rather small thing. And then I've also led larger projects. I did a whole refresh of the makerspace, which actually went the other way as most makerspaces. Instead of advocating to make a makerspace, I was actually advocating to make it a flex space, because we actually needed more study spaces, and it wasn't wasn't being utilized the way that it originally had been intended for. Also projects, even just weeding projects, sometimes if you in collection projects, if you know that you need to refresh, like one of the things that I did when I went into one of the public libraries was I evaluated Asian and Black sci-fi and fantasy specifically. And so just kind of that whole small project, I dedicated a portion of my budget and had, went and pitched that to the director, especially if I, needed a little bit of extra funding. And that went well. Just those little things, even small things like putting together a, book display rotation list. You can really think very, very granularly in this. Even putting together like a staff sunshine committee, even those small things give you this experience that you can really use to say, yep, I guided this, I led this. Doing marketing evaluation for like face outs. There's a lot of different areas that people can get involved, and things like that. So having some grant writing training, or even volunteering to do some grant writing, that's a big thing that kind of hooks into that fundraising piece. And then, are you leading in your hobbies? That's another thing that you can sometimes use as well. I volunteer and I'm leading this group in, my gardening club or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of make the case that you have done some of these things, and gain some of this experience without having to formally go through the leadership training if it's not available. So that is what I have. I have 3 pages of references on all the things that this was a bit more of a lit review. These are all the many research studies and a lot of different like Forbes articles and Harvard Business Review articles, things like that. But there's quite a bit of full research articles in that reference list as well. So thank you for listening. And here's my contact information if anybody has any questions or would like to follow up. And at this point, we've got about 10-15 minutes for questions, discussions, anything like that.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to thank you, obviously, and I'm going to remind everyone they can put their questions in the chat and we will go through those. During the presentation, the only official question we got was, will the slides and video be available? And of course, I told them yes. I've also been dropping some links in the chat as we've gone along, some reminders of who are pre-approved providers of training that you can get LEUs without asking us. So if you are looking for those sorts of things, a lot of the people Jenny mentioned are on that list, and there are many, many others. And of course, the archived webinars through the State Library here in Indiana, and someone else dropped a link for Colorado, and I'm pretty sure they're on our pre-approved list, but I would definitely check the list before taking one of their webinars just to make sure. I think we've got almost all the state libraries on the list by now. So, oh, here we go. Is there a mentor program through the Indiana State Library? Yes. Well, not officially a mentor program. There is the Leadership Academy. That I don't know if it's been announced yet who was accepted, although I believe the committee. Yeah, I believe the committee.
At least the people who have been accepted have been told.
Yeah, and that is once every other year currently. So it is happening in 2023. So if you did not apply and get accepted for this year, keep your eye out for 2025 and or send questions to the professional development staff. Formal mentor program, no, but that is definitely something I can take I don't know if ILF has a mentor program, because if
I
they
think
do,
they do, and okay, I am going to send, I can send an email to Sam. She's one of, Samantha's one of the Purdue librarians. And I know that, I think it's out, well, I know Allie has a mentorship program.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like ILF might.
I think they do. I mean, I will definitely take that to the people to state, but if ILF does, that might be why we don't. So just kind of let you know on the insides there.
Yeah, and I know
Next,
that I've emailed a few people and without getting connected quite yet, but because yeah, I definitely, I'm now a mentor through another organization. I'm going through my fourth round of mentorship, but I'm still looking for one too.
sure. Julie asks, what leadership sources or trainings would you most recommend for staff, such as pages and or janitors?
I would actually, honestly, I would recommend putting them through the same leadership training you would send upper library staff through. And for the same reasons that we listed before, the time management, the energy management, especially with pages, the intercommunication ones, because while so this is always, it all depends on what you call them too. I always say, is it shelf or is it page? It depends on the library itself. Ours would go through communication training at Louisville, and I believe at High Plains they would too, because I'm a former High Plains employee. Because they weren't required to talk to people, but if someone approached them, they did need to respond. And that made a lot of them very nervous, because a lot of our pages were high school students. And they would get asked these questions and we're like, I don't know. So, but just it kind of gave them a little bit of that, something to fall back on. Like, okay, where am I? What do I need? How do I need to answer this? And if it was a directional question, of course, they could just answer it quickly. But if they were kind of given a little bit of guidance. So I would even say creating in-house leadership training for pages would be a really cool thing. That would include the different overarching duties of everyone else in the library if they don't already receive that during training. Because for them to fully understand all the way from top to bottom, the general what people do, that would help them definitely know. So this would be my bread and butter. If somebody would pay me to do this, it'd be amazing. But this, that's the communication, the communication skills, the interpersonal skills, I think would be a really, really good one for pages and other staff like maintenance staff, janitorial staff. Our IT staff would actually go through the same training as what was available to the city, because they worked a lot with us. So we had a lot of, Louisville offered a lot of kind of that interdepartmental, just kind of that interpersonal communication. That one I think is one of the biggest ones, is that interpersonal communication. Not necessarily crucial conversations. That's a little bit different. That's more conflict management. If I might totally be misquoting that, because I've gone through conflict management, but I haven't specifically gone through crucial conversations, because I believe that is an actual specific package training. So I'm not entirely certain on that one, but that's what I personally, just from my viewpoint, would recommend for non-reference staff. Basically, is that interpersonal communication is a big one. I've also seen people go through, believe it or not, email management training. This is not something I would ever think of, but we all deal with it. We all are bombarded, and pages are getting those emails too. And so kind of helping them navigate, do I need to respond to this or not? And so I don't know if that one would be helpful at all. I've not personally taken that one, but I've seen trainings on email. So what's next?
So Katrina says she would also advocate for some assertiveness training for the staff, but do you have any good recommendations on those trainings?
Let me see if I can see
And
who we had that training through. It was amazing.
Yeah. While you're pulling that up, Katrina, if you are in Indiana, I know the Evansville Public Library created their own bystander intervention training, which is not exactly assertiveness, but it definitely has some aspects that are similar. So if you're here in Indiana, you can always talk to them, and they might be able to share their outlines and sort of how they structured it. And I know ILF has had them come and present several times on that.
Okay, the one that Louisville contracted through, and this is a third party, is Fred Pryor. That's who they used for assertiveness training. I do not know how much it is because I didn't set that up. So when they presented assertiveness training and they said, we're going to do this as a city. Let me unshare my screen. We don't need to have that now. The assertiveness training, I asked to go to this and my director was like, Jenny, why? You speak up for yourself all the time. I said, what I need to know is, am I being pushy? I wanted to know, am I going too far? Because again, it's the deregulation. When you have ADHD, you don't always know when you're being just a little bit too much. Which she laughed a lot and said, you know what, go for it. And so that was actually why I took it. And it was actually very reassuring to me that I was not actually being too much. But the wonderful thing that I took away from that, and this is something that I think everyone should keep in mind, is assertiveness to a non-assertive person looks like being pushy. And so it's something that I had to think about. I'm like, okay, this is where I need to take a step back sometimes and be very careful about how hard I push and how confident I say things, and throw in more caveats. Because I have a tendency I had a college professor tell me that I have a tendency to speak in periods the way men do, versus a lot of women speak with question marks at the end of what they say. And it's just it's a very interesting, it's a weird dynamic. It again goes into gender psychology and things like that. But I realized that does come across as pushy sometimes. So kind of learning how to pull back a little bit. But yeah, ours was through the Fred Pryor system. I do not know if there's a less expensive option, because again, I'm not sure how much that cost. All I can say is I felt like it was a very, very good training to go through. It was lovely. A lot of our back-end IT people took it and a lot of our tech services people took it. So
Great. So there was a question about the LEUs. I have put the link in the chat, so everyone.
I like Katrina's. Yeah, that point. Count to 10 before responding. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, definitely. So the form is in the chat if you need it. And then we have one more. Was there resentment that comes from being a leader in your department, especially in training your supervisor and not getting extra pay, or and if so, how would you deal with that?
So in that particular situation, no. It was a very odd situation. So the city library itself, we actually have a fair amount of staff. I say we had a fair amount of staff for the size of city that we served. So the city of Louisville, which is about 27,000. And then we also serve Superior. The town of Superior basically contracted through us, and that was another 20,000, I think, but they had a drop-off point. A lot of the Superior patrons didn't come up. So we were in essence only serving about 27,000. But for the size of population we had quite a bit of staff. So for me to end up being basically the lone wolf in adult services was a bit of a shock. It was not typical. Even after the restructure, as of right now, the last time I checked, they have 5 people in the department. I will say there was a bit of underlying tension during that shift from when I started to pull back a little bit. And when we had to flip, when we had to do that flip, that was where things it got delicate in a number of moments, because you get used to things. When you come into a space, you train, you get used to something, you finally feel like you're getting a hold of something after you're there about a month. And then all of a sudden things start slowly shifting and you start feeling a little uneasy. And so it was something that personally, I actually had to pull my supervisor aside and say, this is what I'm doing. And so I decided to verbalize what I was doing, and that helped the transition a lot. And once you realize what I was doing, that tension went away. So sometimes, but I agree. It was that resentment can come up, and I mean, I didn't expect to be paid extra for it just because it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not really evaluating her. I'm just, and Louisville itself had always had a team teach approach. So every time somebody came on to training, our training system was this person took this person took this person took this. And also so you could get a method and understanding of how your colleagues work. And so it was a general cultural expectation of Louisville that you team teach new hires. So it was, but people generally wanted to do that. And so you're only in it for a short amount of time for the most part. And I mean, obviously the supervisor is the one taking that on, that liability, so to speak. So they are paid to do that. But yeah, so I would say there was some tension, definitely not resentment. I was the only one who knew how to do it. So there wasn't there, I didn't have any choice, but I would have done it anyway. And I had the manual written already, and it's just something that I've done. I have trained my replacement in a number of situations, and things like that. And I usually try to, because I can never resent somebody replacing me. It's not it. A good example is I was working in a corporation and I was actually stepping down from executive assistant to a project assistant because I was actually going through my MLS. And so I had actually said, hey, look, I was open enough with with the CIO of that company. I'm like, I'm going to be leaving for libraries. We both know this when I graduate. And now might be a good time for you to start if it's in the, because he was looking for a project admin for a particular project. I said, why don't you let me step into that? And then because the project was going to be ending about that time. And so he hired a new assistant and I actually trained her and said, this is what I've got. Because when I stepped into that, it was awful. There was nothing. And I don't wish that on people. It's not their fault that they're walking into a situation that they're walking into. So that's just my personal default, is to help the individual person walking into that. As opposed, yes, it does help the organization too, which is a bit of a backfire sometimes because you can resent the organization, but I try really hard not to take that on the person who's coming in after me. But so I don't know if that answered the question at all, but
They said thank you. So
okay, good.
Do you know of any specific leadership trainings for those with neurodivergent?
I don't, but I would be really interested to see if there is. I actually do know that these leadership trainings have really helped me in generally understanding how differently, like, because I can fake it really well. I've been doing it since I was a kid. I didn't even know that I had ADHD until 2 years ago. So my coping mechanisms were so baked in. Finding out that I had a neurodivergence was actually a huge relief to me, because this whole time I just felt like there was something wrong with me. And then when I found this out, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, there's an explanation. I am not alone. And so going through these trainings have actually helped develop very healthy coping mechanisms with ADHD, especially that time management pieces. In scouting specifically, growing up in scouting, that whole leadership is that kind of that planning, being able to step back and look at what is the overarching situation, how to negotiate through things, how to prioritize, how to delegate. All of those things I started learning when I was younger, and I think that was really beneficial to me growing up with a undiagnosed disorder. It helped in that process of mental organization and actually physical organization as well. So I don't know if I would love to know if there's any leadership training specifically for neurodivergence, but I will say that the general training has been helpful, even with me not thinking in a straight line like a lot of people do.
Okay, so we're getting some thank yous. We are at 11 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and have Lisa stop the recording. If anyone needs to rush off, feel free. I have already dropped a link in the chat for the request for LEU. And if anyone does want to stick around and ask a couple more questions, I'm fine with that. And we can gather those up and get those to Jenny afterwards, and I can send out answers with the recording and the slides.